And welcome in everyone to another edition of our Lennox on Baseball live stream podcast. I'm going to get my TV out of the background here as we welcome you into another edition. Yesterday we talked with Travis Chalk from Baseballism, the clothing apparel line. And if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at that interview or the previous ones that we've done, please do so. You can follow us on Facebook, Lennox on Baseball Facebook page. Also follow our Lennox on Baseball YouTube channel that we're getting better with slowly but surely. An absolute pleasure to welcome in Larry Shenk, longtime public relations, media relations director for the Philadelphia Phillies. I've known him for many years, was introduced by a good friend of ours, John McAdams, who I've touched on from time to time and shared stories. But absolute pleasure. Great seeing you. Great seeing your smile. Give us an idea, Mr. Shenk. How are things on your end?
We're doing okay. My wife and I moved into an independent living place in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania 7 years ago. The big house with 4 bedrooms wasn't for us anymore, so we're doing fine here. And the biggest thing, I guess, we're COVID-free so far, which is important because of our age and so forth. And we're enjoying it here. I started a monthly session called Talking Sports, where a bunch of us sit around like a bunch of ladies at a sewing circle. We sit around and talk baseball. And, of course, that stopped back in March when we had the pandemic. And now there's something called Zoom, which I'm not good with, but I've been on it. And so next Tuesday, I have Larry Boa coming on with me for a Zoom for the residents here at Maris Grove. So we'll see how it goes. And I'm retired from the Phillies technically, originally, officially back in 2015. But the Phillies are my hobby. That's what I know. And so I have my own Twitter. I have write stories for the alumni section of the Phillies website, and written a couple books and helping another friend of mine write a book about the history of Phillies minor league teams. There were 115 Phillies minor league teams in the history of baseball with the Phillies, and we're researching them and looking for photos and he's going to self-publish a book. I can't do that kind of stuff, so I'm the editorial advisor and writer and researcher and so forth. So I'm kept busy that way, which is great.
So officially retired, but as I've learned with my parents and with a lot of people that I speak to on a daily basis, far from keeping busy, always involved. It's great to hear. And I want to pick your brain. I'm going to start in a moment with the question that I've been asking a lot of my guests. I started this back in June, and Tom McCarthy is actually one of the guys who I thought, you know what, Tom is doing this. I want to figure out how I can stay involved in the game, how I can tell stories, share stories, and things like that. So I'm trying to come up with an old timers group, similar to what you said that you're doing, just shooting, just talking and telling stories and stuff like that. So I may want to pick your brain via email here in the coming days. Okay. I'm looking for what I call my starting 9 that I'll have 4 or 5 guys on weekly, and we can sort of rotate through guys with their schedules and just, share those stories and hear from them and just, have that coffee group. So that's great that you're doing that. And don't worry about Zoom. If I can do this, Zoom is very easy. The first question that I've been asking people is, and don't tell me you don't remember, but at what point when you were growing up in PA, did you sort of start becoming infatuated and developing that love for the game of baseball?
I grew up in a small town in central Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours from Philadelphia, and I guess I was 10 or 11 years old, and the Phillies won the pennant in 1950, and of course it was black and white TV back then, and most of the games were on radio. Well, they were on radio. You only had a Sunday telecast. So I started following baseball around that time, fell in love with the sport, and I listened to the radio for years. I still prefer to listen to a radio broadcast than a TV telecast. Radio broadcasts, there's a deep fly ball to left field. Your imagination takes over, And I think Scott Fransky at the Phillies has done a great job with that. And I was lucky. My dream was to work for the Phillies, and I wound up doing that. So I was very fortunate.
Take us through. You were with the Wilmington News Journal, and it's funny when I was starting, when I was with the Blue Rocks for many years of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and the history and the guys that you were associated with. Take us through that process, because it wasn't just, hey, I landed the Phillies job. It took a couple of times to finally land it.
It,
Yes.
it really did. I graduated from Millersville State College back then, it was called. I had a degree in elementary education to be an elementary teacher. I didn't really have a feel for it, but that's what I decided to do. And I was coming home from college, from graduation. Drove through Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which had the newspaper in our county, Lebanon Daily News. And I stopped in the office and asked if they had an internship for the summertime where I could look for a teaching job and so forth. They said no, but we have a job as a general reporter who would work on the sports department on Friday nights. The sports department had two people. And of course, Friday nights is always a big high school sports night throughout the season. So I thought, I'll take this job. If I don't like it or don't do well or whatever the case may be, I can always go back to teaching. So in 1961, the Phillies PR job became available. I wrote a letter applying for it, and I was rejected. In 1962, it opened up again, and I applied again and was turned down. Then I was starting to get itchy about not writing enough sports. I was writing weddings and funerals and United Way meetings and the police beat once a week, murders and stuff like that. And then Friday night I'd do sports. So I started sending my resume out to various newspapers up and down the East Coast. And an interview in the same day with the Westchester Daily Local paper in Pennsylvania and the Wilmington News Journal. The sports editor of the Westchester paper had left the newspaper to become the Phillies PR director. So I had two interviews in one day and was rejected both times. Then something came my way. The fellow that they hired in Wilmington lasted for a week and then he quit. So Al Cartwright was a sports editor at the time. He called me back and offered me the job. So in January 1963, I went to Wilmington, Delaware, lived in the YMCA for a week so I could find an apartment. First night in Wilmington, I came out to get my car and it was towed because I was in a parking zone for the evening rush hour. I'm from a little town. We don't have that kind of thing. So I lived through that. So I was doing high school sports there. They had a morning news and an evening journal at the time. And so you wrote a straight news story for the morning paper. Then you had to write a feature for the evening paper, which is long gone now. It's one paper. And I worked with Hal Bodley, who then went on to become the well-known baseball writer in USA Today and MLB.com. And I worked on the morning side, so we went to the office around 4 o'clock in the afternoon and worked till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was October, and but the paper was out, we were finished, and he said, the Phillies PR job's opening up again. Why don't you apply for it? I think you could do it. And so I thought about it, and I thought, well, I better give it a try. So I had an interview. They offered me the job right on the spot. But I said, I need to go talk to my wife about this because we just got married 6 months earlier. And I was a little apprehensive because I was the fourth person in 4 years. So was it the person or was it the organization that there was such a turnover? And I decided, well, if I don't take it, I may never get another chance. And if I don't work out, then I go back to sports writing or go back and try to get a job at teaching. So I decided to take the job and decide I would not fail. And the rest is history, I guess. I survived a long time.
Over all of those years that you worked with the Phillies and you dealt with writers and, the media landscape changed, did your background of being on the other side help in understanding that, they might be a pain in the neck one moment, but they did have a job to do? It was part of your job was helping them do theirs.
Yeah, I remember when I was at the News Journal, in 1963, Al Cartwright sent me to cover the opening day, the Phillies opening day, and I was in heaven. It was 1963. We were playing the Phillies were playing the Cincinnati Reds at Connie Mack Stadium, and it was Pete Rose's first road game. So he was at the batting cage. I went up to him and said, I introduced myself. I said, I hope we're around this game a long time. He kind of looked at me kind of weird, who's this dude, So I covered that game, and the fellow who was the PR director for the Phillies paid no attention to me whatsoever. I went to the clubhouse after the game. Gene Mock, the manager's office was pretty small. I stood in the back of the clubhouse, didn't want to be, too obnoxious or anything like that. And the writers were asking questions. I was just paying attention. And then the writers kind of left the room, and I wandered up to Mock, and I said, Art Mahaffey, who was hurt last year, really pitched a great game today. What is your opinion of this? Do you think he's back from his injury? He says, why don't you go ask him? So that was his response. And I remembered that the PR guy didn't even talk to me, didn't ask me if I needed anything or where I could sit or anything in the press box. And I kind of remembered that. So when I took over in 64, I decided that the small guys from small papers were going to be as important as the big guys from the Philadelphia papers. And I tried to treat everybody that way. And I think it worked out. And of course, in that time frame, the newspapers were the big thing. We had the Evening Bulletin, an evening paper, Inquirer, a morning paper, and the Daily News, who was in between. So you had to juggle press releases, announcements, so that you weren't favoring one over the other, and et cetera. And, you had a call when you had a trade or announcement or a signing or something like that, you had to call writers on the phone, which took a long time. And over time, it changed. Something called a fax machine came into being, which we thought was the greatest thing. And now you type a press release, and within seconds, you send it around the world, through Twitter or whatever the case may be, like a social media. I often kid that I did social media back then, too. I took writers out and tried to get them drunk.
We
entertained the writers all the time.
When did that part of it start to change?
Well, again, in the beginning, the writers wrote the game. The game story was it. And then television started doing more telecasts. And so the writers had to change their approach. The newspapers had to change their approach because fans were watching the game. So now they had to go to the clubhouse to get quotes and so forth. So it changed that way. And I had some background in newspapers, not a lot, but I was geared that way, and I focused on that because that's the life we led. You took care of the writers, you lived with the writers for the whole season, and the same writers all the time. And then in 1971, I was allowed to hire an assistant, and I hired Chris Wheeler, who had a journalism background from Penn State, electronic journalism. While he was at Penn State, he did the first Joe Paterno show up there on their radio station. And so he and I became, I thought, a good combination because I dealt with the print and he dealt with the electronic people, and it became more important. And and then he became a broadcaster, and so he traveled for about 7 or 8 years all the time as a PR/broadcaster. And I didn't have to travel then, which was good. So it turned out to be a good combination. And now the communications department has like 7 people in it. It's so big, and of course social media. I'm on Twitter. That's all I do. I don't do anything I don't do Tumblr or Instagram or Facebook and that kind of thing. So it's a different world. It's an instant news world.
I don't know which decade it would be or which player, but that's one who of all former Phillies that you've with over the years, give me 2 or 3 that would have been great on social media. In social media, in terms of being positive and not the toxic side of it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure anybody in the '64 team, which was my first year, would have been that kind of a person. Um, Later on, the 80 team, probably Larry Boa, because
Okay.
Larry was not only a player, but he had a talk show on radio too. Um, I don't think Schmitty would have done social media. You don't know. It's so different. I don't follow Phillies players on social media. I don't know them anymore, because they're younger and I've not been around them so much. But John Kruk might have been in '93. Darren Dalton '93
Okay.
probably. Kurt Schilling obviously would have been one. Kurt was all willing to go on WIP radio, except when you asked him to do it, then he barked at you, which is okay.
What kind of relationship did you have with Kurt when he was with the Phillies?
He was all right. He was a dominant pitcher. And I think he's Hall of Fame material. Really do. When he pitched, you were going to win. You had a chance to win. Just it was the same with Steve Carlton. But he's a different bird. He has a lot of opinions. He's not bashful, and he does get himself in trouble sometimes. Um, but he was okay. The '93 team probably was the most difficult team to be around because we had a bunch of misfits, as we called them, and rejects and all that kind of thing. And after every game, they would meet. They'd get together in the trainer's room to drink some beer and talk about the game and get on each other if they didn't do plays right or didn't cover base or whatever the case may be. And there's the clubhouse, an empty clubhouse with a bunch of media standing around wanting to talk to somebody. And of course, it could put me in a position, or my assistants put us in a position of being in an awkward position. So, and you could go in the trainer's room, but when you walked in the trainer's room, you was like walking into a hornet's nest. You were part of the organization, but you weren't part of the team. So they kind of, Kruk would tell me, I ain't talking to no media, get out of here, type of thing. Darren Dalton had bad knees, so he always had like 15 minutes of icing to get on his knees after games. So he'd be lying on the trainer's table with his both knees packed in ice, and he'd say, Barron, tell him I'll be out in 5 minutes. Mickey, go out and help Barron, or go out and help Lee or Gene or whoever the PR person was. So he was a great help to the PR department. He's probably the closest friend I had on the Phillies. I knew his mom and dad, got to know them. He became very close to my wife. She did his fan mail for years for him, and he was just a wonderful person. She wound up having some knee problems and was in a nursing home in Wilmington, Delaware, recuperating. And he was doing a radio show in Philadelphia at the time, and all of a sudden he walked in her room and brought her some flowers unannounced. Didn't ask him to do it. He just found out about it and came to see us. So he was a special person, and he's one of the three Phillies people that were. John Vukovich was a good friend too, and Tug was a great guy too. And all three of them, Darren, Vuk, and Tug, lost their lives because of brain cancer. It was really a strange phenomenon. Way too young for all of them, but that's life.
I did out of college. My first 2 years were with the first the Batavia Clippers, and then we renamed them the Muck Dogs, '97 and '98. And Greg Legg was a manager the first year. I'll always have an affinity for Legger. But what was always fun and was a learning process for me was the guys from the Phillies organization that would come up. And one of those guys, or two of them really, Dallas Green was one. And I'll never forget the day he walked into our little front office, and the big white hair was there, and I instantly knew who he was. But in that voice of his that was very distinct, I'm Dallas Green. I'm like, of course you are. But the other one was the Pope, Paul Owens, and it was amazing how respected he was by the coaches, the manager, everyone that was affiliated with that Batavia team, even the players in their history overall, but they knew who Paul Owens was.
Yeah, he was the most single person. I give Paul Owens for turning the organization around. I joined him in '64. We lost the pennant, as everybody knows and likes to remind us. And we had a minor league system that wasn't very good. We had a lot of scouts that were older, that had been there for years. And they brought him in. He was a minor league manager for us. Then he became a scout for us in Southern California. And he would run spring training camps, instructional wise, while he was a scout in Southern California a couple of years. And they brought him in 1965 as the director of minor leagues and scouting. So he changed the scouting department, changed the player development department, and started building an organization that became an outstanding organization. So he's the one that turned the franchise around, in my opinion. He was the best judge of talent I've ever known, the best judge of people, just not ball players. But he could tell you everything about a ball player, but he didn't know his name. You know that guy that plays for the Mets, center fielder? He's been around a little while. He can hit. He's got power. He can steal bases. He's kind of older now. He makes those basket catches. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, Willie Mays. Yeah, Willie Mays. That's the guy. You know, he knew everything about him, but he couldn't remember his name. And I remember one time we were in spring training. We had a left-handed relief pitcher named Max Scarce, and he pitched well, and we wound up in the team that year. And in Lakeland, the clubhouse is down the right field corner. So he and I were walking down the clubhouse after the game. And here comes Max Scarce out of the clubhouse. And I said to myself, this is going to be good. And so Paul comes up and says, nice game there, big lefty. He knew he was left-handed. He didn't know his name. But he was an amazing person. And he brought in Dallas Green as an assistant. And he said to Dallas, the first thing you're going to do, you're going to go to the lowest level of minor leagues in Huron, South Dakota, and manage that year. The next year, you're going to be in Pulaski, Virginia, the rookie league, and manage there. Dallas didn't want to do it. Pope says, you need to get the experience of what's the life in the minor leagues at the lowest level. So he did, and Dallas became the farm director under Paul. And we had a dominant era in the 70s, which climaxed with the World Series in 1980. But it was a great organization. We had we developed a lot of players, and you have to build from within. The successful teams do that, and the successful teams have a deep minor league system so that you can not only bring the players up, but you use them to make trades. He traded Tommy Underwood, a young pitcher, for Bake McBride, who became a very important member of the 1980 team. And then Dallas left to go to the Cubs, and Paul managed the team in '83. We were in first place in May, and Pat Corrales was the manager, who was a good friend of Paul's, who Paul managed in the minor leagues. And he fired him and took over as manager of the '83 team. We won the World Series, losing to the Orioles. So Paul did everything. He was the best part of our organization's history in the player development. We had a lot of good instructors. They were tough people. They pushed the players, and it's a total different atmosphere today now. They're hiring minor league instructors from Driveline and all these other places, and I'm not big on that at all. I'm old school because I'm old.
Organization recently announced, it was last week, that they'll retire Dick Allen's number 15. You guys, he came up in '63, but really established himself in your first year in '64. What did you think? Long overdue in your view, in terms of retiring the number and kind of giving him his kudos for what was a great career?
Yeah, it's a kind of complicated issue because we kind of adopted a unwritten policy in the 90s that you had to be a Hall of Famer to have your number retired. Well, Robin Roberts was sold to the Yankees in spring training, and after the 1961 season, and Bob Carpenter said nobody's ever going to wear number 36 again. There were no ceremonies, no official announcement or anything like that. In 1979, we retired Richie Ashburn's number 1, which was when we inducted him to the Phillies Wall of Fame. It was his 30th or 40th year with the organization, and he became a Hall of Famer in 1995. So it was a long way from '79. And then and we retired Carlton and Spitz numbers the year after they retired, but we knew doggone well they were going to be Hall of Famers. So they were inducted in 94 and 95. And in 1996, we got a lot of feedback from the Del Ennis family. He was not doing well health-wise. His family, his friends, relatives, priests, doctors, nurses were all pushing and getting petitions signed to retire Del Ennis as number 14 because it would mean a lot to Del. Del was my childhood hero. I knew him from the Phillies. I got to know him, visited he and his wife at his house. I just said to Bill and David, or my bosses, that I just don't think that he's a Hall of Fame player. And I think we should, so we kind of said you had to be a Hall of Famer at that point to have your number retired. In 96, Jim Bunning was elected to the Hall of Fame. He wore number 14 for the Phillies. So that was part of the other aspect of the Ennis family. They wanted it retired for him, not for somebody else. And of course, in 1980, Pete Rose was going to be a shoe-in for the Hall of Fame someday, which he would have if he didn't have the other issue. And then Jim Bunning went in the Hall of Fame, and he decided to wear a Phillies hat. And so we retired number 14 for Jim Bunning. If he had worn a Detroit hat, we wouldn't retire the number. And now there's a new regime in the organization. John Middleton's the managing partner, and he's come up with the idea that they need to change, which I don't have any problem with. I think they need to reach out to a younger generation of fans because the 08 team had 3 guys on it that the greatest players that ever held those positions: Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, and Jimmy Rollins. So it's so they decided to retire Dick Allen's number, which is fine. They retired Roy Halladay's number, which puzzled me because, in my opinion, longevity needs to be a big part of retiring a player's number. And Halladay pitched only 4 years with us, of which the first 2 were spectacular, and the last 2 he was battering a lot of injuries. But it's John Middleton and a different regime, so they made that decision, which is fine. So he and I just decided that Dick Allen's number is going to be retired 15. And Dick is going to be back on the ballot again in December for the Hall of Fame. We certainly hope he gets in because I think he deserves to be there. And so, but when you change your policy, you can, which is fine, you then open a can of worms. They're talking about Howard 6, Utley 26, Jimmy 11, Cole Hamels 35. Well, then what about Charlie Manuel? He was the greatest manager we ever had. He had more wins than any manager. And it's going to be a long time before some manager wins that many games. And I go back to my group in 80. Larry Boa has worn the Phillies uniform for 29 years as a player, coach, manager, and coach. Nobody's worn it that long. So should he be considered to have a number retired? So it's a good debate. I think but I think it brings the fans back into it a little bit because we need the younger generation to identify with some of these guys, and retiring a number 11 for Jimmy Hollins would tie in that generation. So it's a good thing that I think they're changing the policy.
When you hear the conversations and people have the debate about if a guy is a Hall of Famer or not, and you mentioned Curt Schilling earlier, and also Dick Allen, and Utley, Rollins, Howard, great Philadelphia Phillies over the course of their careers, probably falls short of Cooper and Schilling. And how do you sort of make the argument when you've got guys who have been, had to go through different processes to possibly get?
Well,
I think it's the golden era now that you referenced.
Yes, right. The golden era. I'm lost now on the different eras they have. But Jim Bunning was elected by the veterans Veterans Committee. He did not make it on the baseball writers ballot. The Baseball Writers Association of America votes for the Hall of Fame. Well, the times have changed. The writers no longer are guys that spend a career as a baseball writer. They spend 1 or 2 years and move on. So you don't have that same core of baseball writers that follow this they used to. And I think the broadcasters should be brought into the picture because they see every game. Baseball writers don't see every game. They did at one time, but they don't anymore. And it's a different process. And Cooperstown has done a great job. They come up with these different eras, and and I think Larry Bow is a Hall of Famer. I may be crazy, but he was dropped off the ballot after the first time because he didn't have enough votes to stay on the ballot. There's a percentage of votes that you have to stay on the ballot, and he definitely should have been on the ballot longer. I don't know if he's going to wind up in one of these committees or not, but I mean, when you look at, and this is going to open a can of worms, when you look at Phil Rizzuto's numbers, they come nowhere close to Larry Bowa's number. Phil Rizzuto was a player in New York. He was a broadcaster in New York, and the most writers that vote for the Hall of Fame are from New York, and that's my take. It's changing, and I think Schilling is a Hall of Famer because when you take into account his postseason play, he was dominant. He was dominant. Should Pete Rose be a Hall of Famer? Well, he's been banned from baseball because he gambled. Well, murderers get set free. It's a long time. Bonds, Clemens, and the drug issue. They certainly are Hall of Fame players. Was Ty Cobb an angel? Was Babe Ruth an angel? Ty Cobb didn't get along with his teammates. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's always an interesting topic. You shared with me before we went on, and I wanted to close this one with you. And you mentioned enjoying listening to games on the radio, but if people watch Tom and the crew on the Philly side, on the TV side, balls hit down the third base side, they may actually see you and your family. Kind of give us an idea on how you guys out for you to be one of these cardboard cutouts that we see in 2020 at the ballparks around the country.
Well, the Phillies, when the season started, every team's doing things differently. The Phillies decided to have cardboard cutouts behind home plate for the three hospitals, which have sponsorships and arrangements with the Phillies. The Moores Hospital, Jefferson, and I guess it was University of Penn. And they had nurses and doctors and aides, cardboard cutouts. Then they opened it up to fans and the front office people. And so I decided that there's 8 of us in our family. We were going to do this. So we took individual pictures. My son, who is a technology expert in the family, then formatted them the proper way and sent them to the Phillies, who has a company in Philadelphia that does all these things. So we're in section 139. We have one whole row of 8 seats. It's right by the foul pole in the left field, so I can be the judge of the ball's fair or foul, but they don't ask me. We did not bring any gloves. I don't know what we're going to do if the foul ball comes that way. We don't have any umbrellas, so we get wet. We get sunburned. I have not seen us on TV yet, but the Phillies have something like 6,000 or 7,000 of these things now in the stands. They really filled it up. Excuse me. Alumni weekend was going to be last weekend. They were going to have their 40th reunion of the 1980 team. So they have them in the upper deck in right field sitting as a whole team, about 30, 40 images of the players. It's a pretty cool thing. And you see it when you watch games on TV, you see this in other ballparks too, but I don't think the Yankees have any, as I recall. We played there. It's a neat thing. I think it's interesting. TV does people, and you try to pick out people. Ben Franklin's there, Dave Montgomery is there. Connie Mack is sitting behind home plate. And somebody's got their dog there and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. And they honored the Philadelphia Negro League stars this past weekend, and they have images of them in the stands too now. So.
Last one for you, and I appreciate you doing this for us. Where did the Baron come from? When did that start?
I was working at the News Journal, and Al Cartwright was the editor. He worked on the evening news. I worked on the morning paper, so we didn't see each other. And we had mailboxes where he'd put notes in your mailbox, and he always addressed it to Baron von Shenk, Baron von Shenk, you spelled Smyrna wrong. Get with it, stuff like that. I thought Smyrna was an eye chart. It never took me a long time to learn to spell that. So it grabbed there, and then I became the Phillies, and he covered us, and Hal Bodley covered us, from Wilmington News Journal on occasion, and they always called me Baron, and it took off from there.
There we go. And I used to get chastised because I was pronouncing it Newark, not Newark, Delaware, where actually my boys were born. All those years later. So absolute pleasure. Great seeing you. Continued health, good health for you and your family. And I'm going to pick your brain if you allow me next week, because I'd love to hear how it went with your friends and Larry Boa, and then I'd love to have you on again, maybe October, November as well.
Perfect. I'm around.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy the day.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you, sir. Larry Shenk, the Baron. Great stories. Was hoping to have Bill Daughtry with us, and was taught, didn't necessarily learn the lesson as well. But we were going to do a double dip today with Larry and Bill Daughtry, who had the privilege of sharing the studio with doing updates in New York for ESPN Radio a handful of years ago. And Bill knows baseball as well as anybody. He's a historian, just like the gentleman we just talked to, Larry Shenk. So we'll work on having Bill on in the coming days. Tomorrow, forget the time, but tomorrow we will be live I think it's 12:30 p.m. I'll put it up on our Facebook page, but we're going to talk a little business of baseball with friend Dan Loney, who has a business show on Sirius XM. We're going to talk with him about how 2020 has affected minor league baseball and the future of minor league baseball. And we both have backgrounds in MILB from our days as broadcasters. So Dan Loney on Thursday and Bill Daughtry down the road. Thanks to Larry Shenk for joining us. He shared some great stories, and every guest I have on, I say, 20, 25 minutes, 25, 30. And ultimately we end up going past 30 minutes because I just want to hear the stories, and I want to share those with you as well, because they're fantastic. And, Larry Shenk right there, the Baron, gave us a lot of wonderful stuff. And I would go to the press box in Philadelphia. He would grant me a press pass, even though I wasn't working media most of the time, but I would go up with John McAdams, who was one of the official scorers for the Phillies, and Johnny Mac was our longtime public address announcer in Wilmington. And I'd go up and I'd sit with Johnny Mac and watch the game. And then when I started covering the Phillies a little bit for XM Radio, he was there as well. And he was always just so accommodating. And like you said, understanding from the newspaper background of when he took over the job of the Phillies, he was not only going to take care of, the big time newspapers and the big time guys in the press box and downstairs when they went to the clubhouse, but he's going to take care of a lot of other people as well. That's going to do it for our Lennox on Baseball live stream podcast. Back at it on Thursday with Dan Loney. Again, like our Facebook page, Lennox on Baseball Facebook page, and also you can give us a follow on our YouTube channel as well, and you can follow on Twitter at Lennox on Baseball. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody.